Hello, I'm Ciarán Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Chocolate Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. This week's episode we're joined by Maresa Sheehan, who's based in the Regional Veterinary Laboratory in County Kilkenny, to get an update on what they're seeing at the moment. With a relatively mild winter and spring has helped many farms, but it also has posed a risk for various parasite challenges, from fluke to Nematodirus to Coccidia, which we discuss in more detail. Risk goes on to highlight how April tends to be a very high risk period for clostridial issues. It occurs at a time when maternal immunity derived from the ewes, wanes and lambs, and we start seeing some sudden deaths in lambs arriving in the lab. We move on to discuss some of the chronic diseases affecting ewes, and on this theme Maresa discussed a new project we'll get underway this year, which will hopefully shed some light on those thin and pining ewes in flocks. Finally, we finish up with Maresa encouraging farmers to investigate health issues in their flock as a first step in addressing those. We start off, however, with Maresa discussing some of the issues her and her colleagues are encountering at the moment.
I suppose this year, coming now towards the end of lambing, when perhaps people are getting tired and hygiene might be slipping a bit, and with the new controls and the use of prophylactic antibiotics, the likes of scour halts and that, we always start to see or have seen a lot of the bacteremias, septicemias in lambs, that sort of watery mouth issue. So I suppose it just highlights the need for the general things of cleanliness, good hygiene, especially towards the end of lambing seasons. I suppose maybe some farms with their vets will, consider using the vaccine for E. coli going forward, and might see that as a useful tool. In other parts of the country, then, particularly in the west, speaking with colleagues up in, Sligo, RVL, and that. They'd have seen quite a bit of fluke in adult ewes this year, leading then to the usual problem of under-conditioned ewes lambing down, and the problems that leads to, increased mortality in ewes, poor lambs, and then, of course, increased susceptibility then to the bacteremias, the watery mouths, and that kind of thing. And because it has been such a mild winter, and then leading to more issues with twin lamb disease and that, and we'd have seen a bit of that with twin lamb disease, very big lambs in ewes, where we would suspect that twin lamb disease is certainly an issue.
A parasite risk can't be underestimated, Maresa. As you indicated, it has been quite a mild winter. That mild winter, this is a never evolving field, but the challenge of parasites in young lambs as well. I starting to see some issues, particularly from the earlier lamb flocks coming in. Is the coccidiosis, the Nematodirus issues starting to appear in the labs?
Yeah, absolutely. Because as you say, lambs are out now quite a while, and we'll all have got a peek at the forecast by now, and the peak is estimated to be between the 6th and the 18th of April this year. So again, your lambs that are affected with your Nematodirus are the 6 to 12-week-old lambs, and the advice then is to treat them kind of 2 weeks after the peak of Nematodirus egg hatching. But these are generalized data, so you really have to keep a close eye on your own farm. The problem with lambs with Nematodirus is that, the peak signs of disease won't directly relate to the peak time that you will get high egg counts. And sometimes egg counts in the Nematodirus infection can be quite disappointing, because the female egg or the female worm of Nematodirus actually doesn't produce that many eggs. So it can be one of those infections where egg count isn't the best indicator of it. And then, as you say, Ciarán, the problem is sometimes you can have a dual infection with coccidiosis. We see quite a bit of problems with coccidiosis, especially on farms, that have a lot of sheep. And I suppose the advice is back to basics again. Move your troughs, try and keep any poaching to a minimum. Keep troughs up off the ground and at a good high level to stop lambs jumping up on troughs and then fecally contaminating meal and stuff like that. So just basic things like that. But sometimes lambs will have to be treated for both Nematodirus and coccidiosis. And I suppose, again, here it might be useful for people if we mention that for treating Nematodirus, you should use your white drenches, your benzimidazole, because there's no big issue with resistance of Nematodirus to white drenches, and it just maintains your other ones then for later on in the year and just tries to reduce that amount of resistance developing on your farm. Because I think, Ciarán, that's and we won't, maybe this isn't the forum to get into it, but definitely resistant anthelmintics is a problem that we're coming across quite a bit on sheep farms, where they're getting into problems with running out of doses that they use. So people really have to be very, very careful with it, and talk to their advisors, talk to their vets about carrying out a drench test and seeing what is working on their farm and how to use that very carefully, and use fecal egg counts a lot more and only dose when you need to. And I suppose one of the key messages ourselves in Teagasc are trying to get out is, certainly don't routinely dose your ewes. So unless there's a proven need, that should be a kind of routine dose that you carry out.
No, and it's one of them issues going forward. I'm sure something you see a lot more of, particularly during the summer. Like, and there's probably no harm mentioning, like, in ewes, you will get high worm counts coming back in some of the fecal samples. Sometimes that might be a secondary thing, Maresa, from ewes that are submitted to the labs.
Absolutely. We're very careful about interpreting kind of very high egg counts in ewes when there's another issue going on, because we do know that, you do get a rise around lambing time in that periparturian period, but really, you still don't need to dose your ewes unless they're thin, they're showing lack of thrive, and they're carrying multiple lambs. So, you have to interpret egg counts around the time of lambing with ewes very, very carefully.
Maresa, we're also starting to see some sudden deaths occurring in both lambs and ewes. What are a couple of common things that cause that, or that you see in the labs?
Yeah. So April is our peak time in the RVLs for pulpy kidney disease and a lot of the clostridial diseases. So sudden death in ewes, the things we think of immediately are clostridial disease and acute pneumonias. So they would be, two of the heavy hitters. Obviously, you can have a bit of hypomagnesemia, tetany, and things like that as well, which we'd also check for. But I think clostridial diseases, especially in younger lambs with the pulpy kidney, is a big cause of losses. I suppose during the lambing season and in the early kind of neonatal and sort of early lamb, we'd also see our red guts or our hemorrhagic enteritis associated with clostridial perfringens. But then as they move out and get a bit bigger, certainly the pulpy kidney disease. So it's really important to get in with vaccines into those young lambs from 3 weeks of age and really try and get them covered, because it's such a shame when you've a nice good lamb, it always seems to be the good ones, and you go out in the field and they're there, laid out. So that, anything to try and avoid that. And then, as you say, mastitis problems, maybe not is usual kind of cause of sudden death, but certainly absolutely a cause of death. But I think your respiratory disease, your pneumonias caused by your pastorellas, and your clostridial disease, they're your heavy hitters this time of the year, really, for sudden death. And obviously then your nematodirus or something where you may just have missed those early signs, or a little bit of going off feed and going off sucking the mother, and then you come out and you'll find them dead.
It really is the worst of the clostridial disease. It tends to hit the best ones. I suppose it's very important to remember too that passive immunity from the ewes is wearing off in some of them older lambs. So it does give, if you've diagnosed it, it does give you an opportunity to say, look, we need to implement a vaccine program on the lambs as well.
Absolutely. And that's why I think we see the peak in April, is because you're getting that weaning maternal protection, and then the lambs haven't been protected. So yeah, it's that ideal kind of scenario then where you get the disease.
Maresa, post-lambing, ewes tend to be under a bit more pressure. Sometimes the weather is not as favourable, it stresses flocks more. We also see some chronic diseases in ewes starting to develop over time, and it probably is the one stage of the year where we see ewes start to pine. Sometimes that is chronic, it can be progressive over a longer period of time. I know it's something you've an interest in RVLs. Looking at some of them ewes are continually wasting away. What are the couple of challenges that could be facing those animals?
Yeah, it's a really interesting area. And hopefully, I suppose it's a good time to mention that in conjunction yourself, hopefully we're going to start up a study this year where we're going to try and investigate that for flocks where, you know, there's good nutrition, they're doing everything to the best of their ability, you know, they're on a good do. Enough of time has kind of elapsed post-lambing where they should be picking up and should be putting back on a bit of condition. But if there's farmers out there where they notice that actually they kind of describe it as a longer tail to your flock. So if you're bringing your sheep, you have that longer tail where there's poor doers hanging out the back a bit. So if you kind of perceive that that's an issue in your flock, I suppose we'd be interested in maybe seeing a few of those flocks, some of those sheep, and we'll go into the details maybe a bit later, Ciarán. But what are the causes of it? Common things are common. So yeah, if you have an issue with antibiotic resistance and you have parasites is certainly going to be a problem with it. Broken mouths is going to be an issue. So if you're not examining your ewes enough and you haven't picked up the ewes that are physically not able to take in enough food because their teeth are missing and they've bad broken mouths. Chronic mastitis, again, that's one of an issue. Lameness can be a big issue as well. So if you've too high a proportion of lame sheep, that can certainly be an issue. But I guess with this study, I suppose what we're hoping to see as well and to try and find out are these iceberg diseases causing an issue. So by iceberg diseases, we're talking about the big ones, the Nematodirus, the Teagasc or sheep pulmonary adenomatosis, that chronic pneumonia. We're talking about CLA, that caseous lymphadenitis, where you get abscessation of your lymph nodes. We're talking about wanes disease in sheep, and we're talking about border disease. So I suppose we know we have these diseases in Ireland. We have diagnosed them. But I guess everyone, including the department, including Teagasc, including the other stakeholders in the sheep industry, would like to know if they're contributing in a bigger way to that kind of thin ewe problem. And I think from a flock owner's own point of view, say in the few flocks where we have diagnosed these iceberg diseases, what the farmers would report is that they knew there was something up. They weren't quite sure what it was, but they knew that their flocks weren't hitting the targets that they should have been hitting, despite them being on a good plane of nutrition. So I suppose, like with your Nematodirus and with your Teagasc or sheep pulmonary adenomatosis, it's called by both names. OPA, I suppose, is the easiest way to refer to it as. You're going to get this chronic respiratory disease in the main. With Nematodirus, you could also get a chronic indurative mastitis. That's a mastitis, it's a hard udder basically that you can't cure. And then with the CLA, you're going to get these swollen lymph nodes. Border disease, you're kind of getting the hairy shakers and maybe a few kind of congenital issues, maybe a bit of abortion. And then wanes disease, you're going to get just ill thrift. In cattle, you'll see a lot of diarrhea with wanes disease, but sometimes in sheep, it's a little bit more insidious than that, and it's just thin ewes. So hopefully in conjunction with yourselves, Ciarán, we're going to get a project up and running where farmers who perceive this as a problem, look, we all know every farm with sheep, with any numbers of sheep, are going to have one ewe that has got a chronic infection or that, had mastitis or a difficult lambing or something. I suppose they're not the flocks we're interested in. What we're interested in is where farmers really think, no, there's something that I have, these are on good grass. I have too many thin ewes. A good time, I suppose, and speaking to yourself, Ciarán, you're probably better to know this is, I suppose, good times to check that kind of body condition score is sort of a few weeks out after lambing, where they've got a chance to recover and then have a look at them, and then maybe decide, or post weaning of lambs, when you've lambs drafted, would be a good time to assess your ewes, or pre-mating would be a good time to assess your ewes. So this is going to run all year. We'll get back again via your advisors as to regards exact start time and end times and what you can do to submit those ewes. They'll be tested free of charge. The reports will be going back to your vet, and obviously we'll be discussing it with the advisors as well, to try and submit those ewes to the RVLs, up to 3 per flock. and to give us a chance of trying to see what might be an underlying problem. Because these diseases really they're called iceberg because you only see the tip of it. But what's going on underneath your flock is that usually there's a really high incidence of this disease. So look, like everything, knowledge is power. Then you can start developing a plan, get a bit of a program in place, and try and get a handle on this problem in your flock, and go then towards trying to get it out of the flock, or reduce the incidence, or reduce the impact of it anyway.
No, it's a really interesting project, and you said it's some of these conditions are really affecting flocks where management, everything else would be correct, but it's just really pulling down that performance. So, as you said before, Maresa, knowledge is power. When you know what it is, you can do something about it. Look, Maresa, it was really good getting an update. Again, if you don't submit samples, it's very hard to diagnose what the issues are. So it's an important thing to do, even at this stage of the season.
It really is, and as well as that, and I hear and I feel people's pain, and I know from submitting stuff from our own farm that it's very frustrating when you don't get a result, but keep submitting them. If you don't get a result in the first one, give us another one, and keep coming back until we try and get to the bottom of it. And if you've sudden deaths, but again, as I say, in April, watch those lambs now for clostridial disease, watch them for Nematodirus, coccidiosis, and then hopefully with this project, keep an eye on those ewes and that body condition score. And if you perceive it as a problem, obviously ignore the one, because you always have one. But if you perceive it as a problem in your flock, we'll be on to your Teagasc advisors, and we'll hopefully get this project up and running, and get a few sheep into the labs and see what's happening out there.
Maresa, great getting an update. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Ciarán. Great to talk to you.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. As Maresa highlighted at the end, it's very important we investigate issues on farms and get a correct diagnosis for what ailments are affecting our lambs and our ewes within flocks. Again, the study she highlighted at the end is something that's very interesting. I think it's going to be a very relevant piece of work. It's something we'll certainly be revisiting again in this podcast and pushing through our social media channels. That's it for me for this episode. Again, for any updates on our sheep program, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Ciarán Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and listen in to any of our episodes.